The air crackles with tension. A nation stands divided, grappling with the weight of a historic verdict: guilty. Donald Trump, the 45th President of the United States, a man who commanded the world's attention, now faces the consequences of his actions. Or does he? The circumstances surrounding this conviction are mired in controversy, a tangled web of accusations, political maneuvering, and a media frenzy that has obscured as much as it has revealed. The story, as presented, seems clear-cut, a triumph of justice over power. But is it truly that simple? Or are we, the American people, being manipulated into accepting a carefully constructed narrative, one designed to silence dissent and consolidate power? This is not about defending Donald Trump's actions. This is about questioning the narrative, demanding transparency, and ensuring that justice, blind and impartial, is truly served. The stakes are high, not just for one man, but for the very soul of American democracy. We must ask ourselves, has justice been served, or have we witnessed a calculated takedown of a political opponent? The answers, like the man himself, are complex, contradictory, and far from clear. What is clear is this: the American people deserve the truth, not a carefully curated version of events designed to fit a predetermined narrative. The Trump presidency, from its incendiary beginning to its tumultuous end, has been a lightning rod for controversy. His supporters, drawn to his outsider status and promises of shaking up the establishment, have remained fiercely loyal, seeing him as a victim of political witch hunts and media bias. His detractors, horrified by his rhetoric and policies, have painted him as a threat to democracy, a demagogue unfit for office. This deep polarization, exacerbated by social media echo chambers and hyper-partisan news outlets, has made it nearly impossible to have a reasoned, fact-based conversation about the man and his legacy. We find ourselves in a dangerous time, a time when truth is elusive and trust in our institutions is eroding. This trial, regardless of its outcome, is a symptom of a larger malaise, a reflection of our fractured political landscape. It is imperative that we move beyond the simplistic narratives, the partisan talking points, and engage in a genuine search for truth. The future of our democracy may very well depend on it. The media, once envisioned as a guardian of truth and a check on power, has become a battleground for competing narratives, often blurring the lines between reporting and opinion. In the case of Donald Trump, this blurring has been particularly pronounced. From the moment he descended the escalator in Trump Tower to announce his candidacy, he has been a magnet for media attention, both positive and negative. His every utterance, every tweet, every facial expression has been scrutinized, analyzed, and often amplified to fit a particular narrative. The relentless focus on Trump, while undoubtedly driven by his outsized personality and controversial actions, has also served to drown out other important stories, shaping public perception and influencing the political discourse. This saturation coverage, often tinged with outrage and indignation, has created an atmosphere of constant crisis, leaving little room for nuance or measured analysis. The result is a public increasingly distrustful of the media, vulnerable to disinformation and susceptible to manipulation. This is not to say that all media coverage of Trump has been biased or unfair. There have been many examples of excellent journalism, of reporters digging deep, uncovering facts, and holding the powerful accountable. However, these examples have often been overshadowed by the more sensationalized, clickbait-driven coverage that dominates the media landscape. This type of coverage, focused on generating outrage and driving engagement, does a disservice to the public, undermining trust in journalism and exacerbating societal divisions. The role of the media in a democracy is paramount. It is tasked with informing the public, holding power to account, and facilitating a robust exchange of ideas. However, when the media becomes a weapon in the hands of political partisans, when it prioritizes sensationalism over substance, it fails in its duty to the public. In the case of Donald Trump, the media has often fallen short of its responsibility, contributing to the polarization and distrust that now plague our nation. The consequences of this failure are far-reaching, eroding the very foundations of our democracy. The intersection of law and politics has always been a fraught one, a delicate dance between the pursuit of justice and the wielding of power. In the case of Donald Trump, this intersection has become a full-blown collision, with accusations of politically motivated prosecutions and weaponized legal systems flying from all sides. His supporters see him as a victim of a deep-state conspiracy, targeted for daring to challenge the status quo. His detractors, on the other hand, believe that he is finally facing accountability for years of alleged wrongdoing. The very nature of the charges against Trump, often focusing on his actions while in office, lends itself to accusations of political motivation. His opponents argue that no one, not even a former president, is above the law, and that his actions, if proven, warrant prosecution. His supporters counter that these prosecutions are nothing more than attempts to silence a political opponent and prevent him from seeking office again. This back and forth, fueled by partisan animosity and distrust, only serves to further erode public faith in the justice system. The selection of judges, prosecutors, and even juries becomes a political football, with each side accusing the other of stacking the deck in their favor. This politicization of the judicial process, regardless of which side is engaging in it, is deeply damaging to the rule of law. It creates the perception that justice is not blind but rather a tool to be wielded by the powerful against their enemies. Such a perception, once ingrained in the public consciousness, is difficult to dislodge and can have corrosive effects on the very fabric of a democracy. The Trump case, regardless of its eventual outcome, has exposed the fragility of our institutions and the deep divisions within our society. It has also highlighted the dangers of allowing politics to infect the judicial process. When legal proceedings become weaponized for political gain, everyone loses. The pursuit of justice should never be about settling scores or consolidating power. It should be about upholding the rule of law, ensuring fairness, and protecting the rights of all citizens, regardless of their political affiliation. Section 4. The verdict, justice served or orchestrated. The guilty verdict reverberated through the country, sending shockwaves across the political spectrum. For some, it was a moment of long-awaited justice, a validation of the belief that no one, not even a former president, is above the law. For others, it was a gut punch, a confirmation of their worst fears, that the system was rigged against Trump, that this was a politically motivated prosecution designed to silence a powerful opponent. The verdict, far from healing the divisions within the country, only seemed to deepen them, fueling anger, resentment, and a profound sense of unease. The prosecution, in its closing arguments, presented a compelling case, laying out a trail of evidence that they argued proved Trump's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. They painted a picture of a man who, driven by ego and a thirst for power, had abused his position for personal gain, trampling on the Constitution and betraying the trust of the American people. The defense, however, argued that the case was built on shaky foundations, on the testimony of unreliable witnesses and circumstantial evidence that could be interpreted in multiple ways. They claimed that Trump was the victim of a witch hunt, targeted by political enemies determined to see him punished, regardless of the facts. The jury, tasked with the weighty responsibility of sifting through the evidence and determining the truth, ultimately sided with the prosecution. But the speed with which they reached their verdict, some argued, raised questions about the thoroughness of their deliberations. Had they been swayed by the weight of public opinion, by the relentless media coverage that had painted Trump as guilty long before he stepped foot in the courtroom? Or had they, as the prosecution maintained, simply followed the evidence wherever it led? These questions swirling around the verdict like dust devils fueled suspicion and mistrust, further eroding faith in the judicial system. The verdict, regardless of one's personal feelings about Donald Trump, should give every American pause. It represents a pivotal moment in our nation's history, a moment when the rule of law collided head-on with the maelstrom of partisan politics. Whether justice was truly served, or whether this was a politically motivated prosecution designed to eliminate a threat, remains a matter of intense debate. One thing is certain, the aftershocks of this verdict will continue to be felt for years to come, shaping our political landscape and testing the very foundations of our democracy. Section 5. Beyond the headlines, unanswered questions, lingering doubts. The dust has settled, the verdict read, the sentence passed. Yet a sense of unease lingers, a feeling that there is more to the story than has been revealed, more questions than answers. The mainstream narrative, the one that dominated headlines and airwaves, declared Trump's guilt unequivocally, presenting a neat and tidy conclusion to a messy and complex saga. But scratch beneath the surface, and cracks in that narrative begin to appear, revealing a web of unanswered questions and lingering doubts. The speed of the investigation, the seemingly selective leaking of information to the media, the partisan leanings of some involved in the case. These factors, while perhaps not individually conclusive, combine to create a miasma of suspicion around the entire process. The prosecution's case, while strong on the surface, relied heavily on the testimony of individuals with questionable motives. Individuals granted immunity or leniency in exchange for their cooperation. Were these witnesses motivated by a desire to tell the truth, or by a desire to save themselves regardless of the cost? Then there's the question of the evidence itself. Much of what was presented was circumstantial, open to interpretation, its significance dependent on the lens through which it was viewed. The prosecution wove a compelling narrative connecting the dots, painting Trump as the mastermind behind a grand conspiracy. But were those connections real, or were they merely the product of prosecutorial zeal, of a desire to secure a conviction at all costs? These questions, these doubts, are not about defending Trump or minimizing the seriousness of the accusations against him. They are about ensuring that justice, true justice, blind and impartial, has actually been served. When doubts linger, when questions remain unanswered, faith in the system erodes, replaced by cynicism and mistrust. This is not a partisan issue. It is about the integrity of our institutions, about the very principles upon which this nation was founded. Section 6. Seeking Truth, a call for transparency and continued inquiry. The Trump case, regardless of its outcome, has left an indelible mark on the American psyche. It has exposed the raw nerves of our political divisions, fueled mistrust in our institutions, and raised profound questions about the future of our democracy. Moving forward, it is imperative that we resist the temptation to retreat into our partisan trenches, to view this case solely through the lens of our pre-existing beliefs. Instead, we must demand transparency, pursue accountability, and engage in a genuine search for truth, no matter how uncomfortable it may be. The first step towards healing the wounds of this divisive chapter is a commitment to transparency. The American people deserve to know the full story, not just the version curated by those in power. This means releasing all relevant documents, making witness testimony public, and allowing for a thorough and impartial investigation into the handling of the case. Sunlight, as they say, is the best disinfectant, and only through full transparency can we begin to rebuild trust in our institutions. Next, we must hold those in power accountable, regardless of their political affiliation. If there were instances of prosecutorial misconduct, of evidence being withheld or manipulated, those responsible must be held to account. Similarly, if there is evidence that Trump or his associates engaged in illegal activity, they too must face the consequences of their actions. Justice, to be truly just, must be applied equally without fear or favor. Finally, we must engage in a broader conversation about the state of our democracy. The Trump case has exposed deep flaws in our system, from the influence of money in politics to the hyper-partisanship that has poisoned our discourse. These are not new problems, but they have reached a crisis point, threatening the very fabric of our nation. It is time for a national reckoning, a coming together to address these fundamental issues and find common ground. The road ahead will be long and difficult, but it is a journey we must take if we are to preserve the ideals upon which this nation was founded. The truth, elusive though it may be, is out there. It is our duty, as citizens of this great nation, to demand it, to seek it, and to defend it, no matter the cost. Only then can we begin to heal the divisions that threaten to tear us apart and build a more just and equitable society for all.